She thought she'd buried me under a pile of petty violation letters edging lines, trash bins, lawn symmetry, but what she didn't know was I'd been trained to outlast siege tactics tougher than hers. So I turned her own rules against her, and in a room full of neighbors, I watched her authority crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. All because she couldn't stand the sight of a quiet man's boat named after his late wife, parked exactly where it was allowed to be. They say every man has his piece. Mine was supposed to be Magnolia Ridge, a quiet lakeside community, tucked in the soft hills outside Beaufort, South Carolina. After nearly 3 decades in the Navy, most of it spent coordinating coastal search and rescue missions or living out of a duffel, I figured I'd earned a slice of silence. Something I could own. A modest single-story house, gray siding, sturdy porch, and a slab of land wide enough to stretch without stepping on anyone's toes. What sold me on the place wasn't just the house, it was the side yard. A poured concrete pad maybe 22 feet long, tucked neatly beside the garage with a curved gravel path leading to the back gate. It was exactly where I pictured the hibiscus living. The boat wasn't fancy, just a reliable 20-foot rigid inflatable I'd used in training ops with a matte gray hull, a weathered anchor winch, and tubes thick enough to eat up rough surf like candy. It wasn't about glamour, it was about memory. That boat had seen more coastlines than most people ever would, and it was named after my late wife Mary Ann, who used to plant hibiscus along every fence we ever lived behind, no matter how temporary. That boat was the only thing I had left that still carried her name. The HOA's documentation was clear when I closed on the property. Recreational vehicles, including boats, could be stored on designated side pads if they were kept clean, covered, and didn't obstruct walkways. So I parked the hibiscus precisely there, tucked behind a waist-high hedge, cover tight, wheels chalked, hull rinsed after every outing. For the first few months, I hardly exchanged more than a nod with anyone, just the way I liked it, until Colleen Brewster got elected. Now every neighborhood has a Colleen, 60 years old retired accountant, perfectly dyed auburn bob that didn't move even when the wind did. She lived 3 houses up right on the bend in a colonial style with a magazine lawn and twin topiaries clipped into miserable little spirals. It didn't take long for me to spot her morning patrol, slow rolling down the street in her champagne-colored golf cart clipboard, balanced on one knee, expression fixed somewhere between disgust and divine judgment. I knew her type, the kind who mistook petty control for real leadership, who equated conformity with safety, who couldn't stand that someone else had chosen a different path and carried it home in the shape of a military-grade boat. It was a Saturday morning when she first approached. I just returned from an early fishing trip, was rinsing the hibiscus, working quietly with a cup of coffee cooling on the trailer fender. "Excuse me," she called, her voice tight with politeness and poison. I looked up, blinking into the sun. "Yes, that," she said, nodding toward the boat with a tone people reserve for vermin isn't quite in keeping with the neighborhood aesthetic. I paused the hose. "Ma'am, it's parked on a compliant pad behind the line of sight, and the CC&Rs allow it. I made sure before I bought the place." Well, she sniffed. "Just because something is allowed doesn't mean it should be flaunted. It looks aggressive, military." She said military like it was a stain, like it was something shameful. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, and for a moment I saw it. Not just the disapproval, but the threat, the need to bend people to her will. My voice was level when I replied, "It's a boat, Ms. Brewster, and it's got a name." She blinked. "The hibiscus. After my wife. She planted flowers, I pilot hulls. This one carries both." Her lips thinned. "Some of us worked hard to create a peaceful environment here." "So did I said. "And I'm keeping it peaceful, right where it is." She didn't argue, just scribbled something on her clipboard and rolled away. I wish that had been the end of it, but it was the beginning. Exactly a week later, I got the letter. Certified mail. Magnolia Ridge Homeowners Association header, stamped in teal blue. It began with a violation notice citing my non-compliant visible watercraft and threatening daily fines of $50 starting within 14 days if the boat was not removed from visual prominence. I read it 3 times, then pulled out my closing documents. Page 19 of the CC&Rs. Section 6.1, recreational vehicles, including boats, may be stored on side yard pads as long as they are covered, maintained, and do not obstruct walkways or driveways. My pad approved. My coverage flawless. The walkway clear. There was no clause against visual prominence. Just a line about preserving neighborhood harmony, which is about as subjective as you can get in a country with 4 million different garage colors. I crafted my response that same night, cited the governing rules, included time-stamped photos showing the boat's location and maintenance, attached a copy of the approved plot plan with the concrete pad outlined. Mailed it certified return receipt requested. No emotion, just facts. But I knew that wasn't the end. People like Colleen don't retreat from logic. They escalate. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, another envelope. This time the letter was sharper. Said the board had reviewed my response and deemed my interpretation inconsistent with community expectations. The fines would begin the following Monday. I sat in my kitchen, the envelope spread across the table like a threat, and stared at it over a half-drunk cup of stale coffee. This wasn't about a boat. This was about power. About someone who had never served a day in uniform telling me that a piece of equipment I'd literally trusted with my life had no place near her petunias. She'd made a mistake. She thought I'd fold, that I'd store the boat away, sell it maybe, or worse, shrink into compliance. But she didn't understand what 30 years in uniform teaches you: how to stand firm when the wind gets ugly. I wasn't going to fight her with emotion. I was going to fight her with law, policy, and the one thing HOA tyrants fear most: process. That weekend I drove around the neighborhood slow and deliberate. I counted 3 other boats, 2 trailers, an RV with peeling paint that looked like it hadn't moved since Obama's first term. I took photos, noted addresses, zoomed in on the dates on inspection stickers. One of the boats didn't even have a cover. One trailer sat with a flat tire and grass growing up through the wheel well. No notices on their doors. No certified mailboxes. Just mine. I logged everything. I didn't complain to the neighbors. Didn't talk trash. I just gathered facts. If Colleen wanted a war of paperwork, I was happy to oblige. But I wasn't done. I started reading. Late into the night, pulling HOA bylaws off their clunky website, looking up South Carolina property code, scanning every clause about enforcement due process, selective application, and ARC compliance procedures. My printer ran out of ink twice, but by Sunday evening I had a binder, and I had a plan. Colleen thought she was playing checkers, but this wasn't her board anymore. I'd spent a career learning how to disassemble systems, how to stay within the chain of command while dismantling its abuse. She wanted my boat gone, and she was going to learn exactly how difficult it is to move a flower named hibiscus, especially one with a hull made of Kevlar and a pilot trained in battlefield patience. The battle line had been drawn, and Colleen, she had no idea what kind of sailor she just tried to drown. By Monday morning, I wasn't just annoyed I was activated. Colleen had poked the wrong bear, and now it wasn't just about a boat or a petty fine. It was about principle, about someone abusing a clipboard and a vague clause to try and push a man into quiet compliance. And the more I thought about it, the more determined I became to show her that silence wasn't weakness, it was discipline. The kind that once broken meant action. The next step in any operation is intelligence. So I started digging. First into our HOA's bylaws, the kind of paperwork they hand you in a plastic folder at closing and hope you'll never actually read. But I did, line by line, clause by clause. And it didn't take long to find cracks, big ones. The Architectural Review Committee, or ARC, was supposed to be the body approving or denying anything related to neighborhood aesthetics, boats, sheds, even paint colors. But the ARC hadn't met in months. There were no published minutes, no evidence of decisions. The last noted activity was from nearly a year ago, and even that was about a backyard fence. And yet here was Colleen firing off violation notices, claiming ARC authority like she ran the show solo. That wasn't just sloppy. It was a procedural failure. According to our own rules, aesthetic violations required ARC review documentation and a vote by at least 2 members. She'd skipped all of it. She'd turned governance into dictatorship. The problem was she was betting no one would notice. Most folks in Magnolia Ridge were retired couples who just wanted to sip iced tea and complain about gas prices. And that's fine. But it also made them vulnerable to HOA overreach, because the fewer people who read the fine print, the easier it was for someone like Colleen to rewrite it by behavior alone. I wasn't going to let her. I started keeping a file. scanned the letters she'd sent, took time-stamped photos of the hibiscus in its pristine state parked exactly where it belonged. But I didn't stop there. That Friday evening, I took a slow drive through the neighborhood. No music, just a notepad and my phone. I documented everything: a dented RV with cracked windows in a driveway on Spruce Court, a rusting trailer tucked half under a carport with flat tires and no cover, a commercial van with ladder racks and bold vinyl letters for a plumbing company parked overnight in front of a house. None of them had violation notices taped to their doors. None had received certified mail from the HOA. Selective enforcement was one of the biggest legal vulnerabilities in any HOA framework. The rules had to apply equally, or they risked everything. I had visual proof that Colleen wasn't enforcing anything. She was targeting. By Saturday, I was ready to launch what I now called the Jasmine Plan, named not for the flower, but for its meaning in naval slang, a sweet sting. The idea came while I was flipping through the HOA's parking policies. Buried in paragraph 4, section 12.3, was a line about overflow community guest parking. It stated these spots were open to short-term use, defined as 72 hours or less, unless otherwise marked. There were no prohibitions against residents using them, just an implication that they were for visitors. And there down the hill and directly across from Colleen's home sat 6 paved spots in a quiet cul-de-sac, mostly unused. My plan, simple. Each Friday evening, I'd move the hibiscus from its legal parking pad beside my garage and hitch it to my truck. I'd back it slowly and professionally into one of those guest spots. And then come Sunday night before the 72-hour clock ran out, I'd bring her right back home. Rinse. Repeat. Colleen had demanded the boat be removed from its location. Fine. I was removing it. Legally, temporarily, and placing it in full view of her curtain-lined bay window. A weekly bloom of defiance, a rolling hibiscus blossom with registration numbers and marine-grade rope. The first move was quiet. I didn't make a show of it, just hitched up the trailer, backed her down the lane, and parked her in the center spot. Straight, level, locked. The cover taut. I even placed a little reflector triangle behind the tires just to make it extra courteous. Then I walked home slowly. Didn't look at her house, though I could feel the blinds twitch. Didn't smile, didn't wave, but I knew she was watching. The hibiscus sat there all weekend. Come Sunday at dusk, I brought her back. And the next Friday, I did it again. For 3 weekends straight, I played my part. Didn't say a word at meetings, didn't acknowledge the shift, just moved the boat like clockwork. Meanwhile, I printed out each HOA rule that backed me up and slipped copies into my binder. It was becoming a ledger, a record not of rebellion, but of accountability. On the 3rd Friday, while I was walking back from dropping the trailer, I saw Harold, the HOA treasurer, pulling weeds around his mailbox. He nodded toward the guest lot. "She's losing her mind, you know. I played dumb." "Who, Colleen?" he muttered. "Watches that spot like it owes her money. Drives by 3 times a day checking the timestamp." "It's legal," I said evenly. "Not saying it's not," he said. "Just saying. She's not used to being reminded she's not in charge of everything." That was exactly the point. I wasn't just complying, I was demonstrating her limits. And limits, when publicly exposed, start to look like weakness, especially to people who rule by fear. By the end of the month, I started attending the HOA meetings. Just showed up, sat in the back, took notes, didn't speak unless spoken to. My presence alone threw the rhythm off. Colleen's tone tightened. Her updates became vague. At the September meeting, when she was rambling about pool maintenance contracts, I raised my hand politely and asked if the ARC had published any minutes from their last session. She blinked. "The committee is currently in a transitional phase," she said. "No formal meetings have occurred since spring, but approvals have been processed as needed." "By whom?" I asked. "ARC decisions require quorum. Has the board been substituting?" she stammered. "Well, the president is permitted to make temporary executive decisions in some circumstances, not regarding aesthetic violations according to Article 9, Section 2. I said, flipping open my binder. Harold and Nina looked at each other. Colleen's lips went tight. "We can follow up with a formal clarification," she said coldly. "Appreciated," I said. "Transparency helps all of us." From that point forward, I wasn't just a resident. I was a presence. And her stranglehold on perception started slipping. Other neighbors began whispering. Sarah from the corner house mentioned she'd gotten a warning last year for a patio umbrella being too bright. George, 2 doors down, said Colleen once complained his lawn looked too natural. The stories began piling up, one by one. Her control wasn't as solid as she thought it was brittle, and under pressure it was beginning to crack. But she didn't back off. No, she doubled down. She started citing me for trivial things: a garden hose left uncoiled, a trash bin rolled out 45 minutes before the window opened. Each notice was formal. Each one was logged, and each one was added to my growing file labeled Colleen's paper trail. She was getting desperate. That much was clear, and desperation leads to mistakes. I didn't have to provoke her. I just had to stay calm, compliant, and meticulous. Because this wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about proving she was unfit to lead. And as the jasmine bloomed each Friday in the form of a gray boat gleaming in the cul-de-sac, I knew the neighborhood was watching. The flower was blooming. And Colleen, she was starting to wilt. By the 5th week, it was no longer just about the hibiscus sitting in the guest parking lot. It was about what she represented. Every Friday evening, without fail, I rolled her down the lane like clockwork. Slow, silent, dignified. I didn't need to slam doors or make speeches. The sight of that clean gray boat resting in full view of Colleen's meticulously trimmed hedges did all the talking. She'd watch, of course, always did, from behind half-drawn blinds through the side window of her champagne-colored golf cart parked nearby, sometimes even walking her dog past 3 times in 1 hour just to get a closer look. But she never said a word to me again, not directly. Instead, the violations started, not about the boat. She couldn't touch that anymore, not with the binder I had and the law backing me. So she aimed lower. The first was about the edging around my front lawn. Inconsistent trimming line, the letter said. A 3-foot section allegedly detracting from neighborhood uniformity. I'd just edged it 2 days earlier. I took photos, marked the date, and Time responded with a short email and a timestamp set of images. Next came the trash bin, placed curbside prior to the approved window, it claimed. The timestamp on my door camera said otherwise. I documented it again. Each warning felt pettier than the last, but I knew better than to get angry. I had handled far more dangerous opponents with less visible malice. Colleen was just trying to drown me in paper cuts. She wanted to wear me down, but she didn't realize the game she was playing was one I'd been trained for: endurance, structure, procedure. I was Navy through and through, and that meant one thing. I knew how to prepare a case, and I knew how to finish it. By now, my file had grown into a folder the size of a phone book. Original CC&R documents, photos of violations from other homes that had gone untouched, every letter Colleen had sent, logs of every meeting, and full-color printouts of South Carolina HOA statutes she had ignored. It was time to take it further. I reached out to Harold and Nina, the treasurer and secretary, both of whom had grown visibly uncomfortable at the last few meetings. I didn't make demands. I invited them for coffee at a quiet shop just outside Magnolia Ridge Neutral Ground. I came with my folder, my facts, and one simple opening line. We all want the same thing: a neighborhood that runs right. But that's not what's happening. I let them talk. Let them vent. Harold, as expected, was the first to flinch. She doesn't even loop us in sometimes, he muttered. Last month she fined someone over patio furniture color, and I didn't even see a vote. Nina nodded, more guarded. I've served on this board 5 years. This isn't how we used to do things. It's gotten heavy-handed. That was my opening. I laid it out clearly. Colleen had acted without proper ARC process, enforced rules selectively, and used her position to launch personal vendettas. I slid them copies of the notices I'd received, none of them citing verifiable, repeatable standards. I showed them photos of the same or worse violations from other homes that hadn't drawn attention. She's turning the HOA into a weapon, I said. And that's not just bad policy. That's legal exposure. If someone sues, and believe me, I've spoken with legal counsel, it won't be her on the hook. It'll be the HOA, which means dues go up, community reputation goes down. And none of you signed up for that. They were silent for a moment. Then Nina spoke. What exactly are you asking us to do? Follow the process, I said. Review the violation, rescind it formally, make it clear the rules apply to everyone equally. And if Colleen refuses to support that, Well, then maybe it's time to ask whether she's still the right person to lead. I didn't threaten. I didn't shout. I just made the consequences visible. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Word spreads fast in communities like ours. I didn't have to campaign. I just shared the facts with a few neighbors I trusted, like George the retired Marine down the street and Sarah the young mom who always waved on her way to school drop-off. They knew what Colleen had been doing. Many of them had stories of their own. One woman had been written up for putting a gnome in her garden. A man across the way got dinged for letting his flagpole tilt by 2 degrees. It wasn't just me anymore. It was us. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and that night it was packed. Folding chairs were brought in from storage. Couples stood in the back. Even Harold seemed surprised by the turnout. Colleen sat at the front jaw, tied a stack of notes in front of her, like a shield. Nina beside her. Harold cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. They flew through the agenda: landscaping budget pool, maintenance reserve fund allocation. Then the floor opened for resident comments. George was the first to stand. "I've been here 15 years, he said, voice low and gravelly. "I've seen 3 presidents come and go. I ain't never seen one use the rules like a club until now." A murmur spread. "We're not children," he went on. "We're homeowners, veterans, parents. We deserve consistency, not favorites. Not punishment for asking questions." Sarah spoke next. "My daughter's playset got cited for being visible from the street, but the one across the street, nothing. I asked for clarification and was told to check the handbook. This isn't how community is supposed to feel." Others stood one by one. Every story was calm, direct and unsettling in its pattern: selective enforcement, vague standards, fear of retaliation. Then I stood, binder in hand. "Many of you know about the issue with my boat, the Hibiscus," I began. "What you might not know is that I did everything by the book. I followed every rule in our CC&Rs. I maintained the boat, kept it covered, stored it on an approved pad, and didn't obstruct anything." I flipped open the binder. This, I said, holding up the violation notice, was the response. And when I asked for clarification, I got fines. And then when I challenged those fines with documented proof, I turned to Colleen. I received 6 additional violation notices over the next month. For things like edging grass, for putting my trash can out an hour too early. Every one of those notices was tracked, time-stamped, and cataloged. And every one of them came after I pushed back on her authority. I turned to the room. That's not community leadership. That's harassment. The room was still. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal application of the rules, for proper process, for a board that respects the homeowners it serves. I faced the board. "Harold, Nina, you've seen the documentation. You know the process wasn't followed. I'm asking here and now that the violation notice against me be formally rescinded, and that this board commit to upholding the standards it was elected to enforce, not inventing new ones to settle personal scores." Colleen's face had gone rigid. Her hands clutched the arms of her chair, but she didn't speak. Harold cleared his throat. "We've reviewed Mr. Delaney's file," he said, voice steady, "and we agree that the notice should be rescinded, effective immediately." A ripple ran through the room, then a soft round of applause. Nina nodded in agreement. Colleen sat stone-faced, not even blinking. Then a hand shot up from the back. A woman I didn't recognize. "I'd like to motion we discuss leadership changes," she said. "This pattern of behavior, it's not acceptable. Maybe we need new direction." The air crackled. Harold shifted uncomfortably. "Per bylaws, that discussion would need to be tabled and scheduled for a formal vote," he said. "Then schedule it," the woman replied. "Tonight makes it clear it's time." There was no vote that evening, but Colleen knew. We all knew. The walls were closing in. Her power, built on fear and silence, had been dismantled by transparency and truth. After the meeting, neighbors shook my hand. Sarah smiled and said, "You didn't just save your boat. You reminded all of us we have a voice." George clapped me on the shoulder. "That hibiscus of yours stands for more than just a flower now." And he was right. The boat stayed exactly where it was, on its pad, clean, covered, legal. But now it was more than a vessel. It was a monument to resilience, a symbol that in the face of petty tyranny, calm resistance backed by principle still wins. And Colleen, She never sent another letter. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't mean raising your voice, it means raising your standards. The story of Marcus Delaney and the hibiscus reminds us all of the quiet strength found in dignity, discipline, and truth. When faced with unfair treatment, it can be tempting to lash out or back down. But Marcus chose a third path, the path of principle. He didn't just protect his rights as a homeowner, he did it with clarity, patience, and relentless attention to what was fair. And in doing so, he didn't just win a battle about a boat, he helped reset the compass for an entire community. This story is a powerful reminder that petty authority only thrives in the absence of informed resistance. HOA board supervisors and even small-town leaders sometimes forget their role is to serve, not to rule. And when someone like Colleen chooses to weaponize rules instead of uphold them, it takes someone like Marcus, someone steady, someone informed, someone unshakably grounded to remind them that power has limits. To our listeners, if you're ever faced with a similar situation where you know the truth is on your side, but the system seems louder, don't lose heart. Learn your rights, keep records, ask questions publicly, and most importantly, stand your ground respectfully. Because there's no greater threat to injustice than someone who refuses to be intimidated. And sometimes what looks like just a boat is actually a symbol, a memory, a legacy, a line in the sand. Whether it's a boat, a garden, a flag, or even a simple act of kindness if it matters to you, and it's within your rights, don't let anyone bully it out of your life. From all of us here at US Justice Story, thank you for listening, for caring, and for standing with those who quietly fight for fairness. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of a time when you stood firm, or maybe a time you wish you had, we invite you to share it with someone else. Because courage is contagious, and truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be heard. Until next time, stay steady, stay kind, and never underestimate the strength of a calm voice with the facts in hand.